I bought the Apple One November 2010 at Christie's in London. Actually, I was dreaming to have an Apple One since 1977. The Apple One, after I purchased, it became something is good to know is there for me. Keeping on studying the digital revolution and telling the story to the new generation. I bought the Apple One November 2010 at Christie's in London. Actually, I was dreaming to have an Apple One since 1977. The Apple One, after I purchased, it became something is good to know is there for me. Keeping on studying the digital revolution and telling the story to the new generation.
Pause it.
When my son, who's now 47...
So you might go, why am I watching these videos? Well, some owners who couldn't come yesterday recorded some videos and Skype calls. There's a lot of them, so I picked two that we could use, just because they're interesting. And the first person you saw, his Apple One is here. He flew two gentlemen in over from Italy to operate his computer. So it's very cool. That was the first, that particular Apple One over there was the first Apple One to publicly run, probably in 30 plus years. It was run earlier, I guess 2011 or 2012, at University of Turin. So, and those are the guys who restored it. So, stop by, talk to them, and really, ask them questions. And this particular person here is, and I'm going to play her little interview while we wait for everyone. This is Liza Loop from the Loop Center. She actually has what we call provenance, which is the history of an artifact. She is the owner of the first production Apple One, and the reason why we know that is because Wozniak gave it to her, and before they delivered the Byte Shop. So.
When my son, who's now 47, was born, I knew I was such a rebel that I would probably make trouble for him in school, even if he didn't. So I started, I took being a parent as a serious thing, and I started studying how to be a parent while I was still pregnant. And one of the things I had to study was what goes on in schools, because I had to decide whether I would. Homeschooling was a big deal at that time. It was a new concept. It was actually a very old concept, but new to my generation. So I took a course at Sonoma State, was Sonoma State College, now it's Sonoma State University, in Montessori education. I had been introduced to Montessori, and I was interested in maybe that was the right thing to do. And Ursula Thrush, who started the Maria Montessori of the Golden Gate, taught the class, and she kept saying, wait till Dr. Brown gets here. Dr. Brown is wonderful. And he had a teletype in that Montessori school, and that was attached to Lawrence Hall of Science. And he was teaching 5, 6, and 7-year-olds how to program in the pilot language, which is a simple text processing language. And they were programming their Montessori lessons so they could be used as computer games on a teletype by their classmates. He became my mentor. He was one of the founding board members of Loop Center. He introduced me to people like Bob Albrecht of People's Computer Company. And he was at SRI at the time. He introduced me to the mouse before it was a product. when I decided to start the computer center, I knew that I didn't know anything about computers. So I needed to have people who knew about computers to teach me. So I started the Sonoma County Computer Club. A couple of other people were going down to the Homebrew Computer Club, and they said, Liza, you have to go there. So it was about a year after we had opened up our original shop. And in the share section, I raised my hand and said, I have a public access computer center, and I'm taking computers into schools, and I'm looking for collaborators. And Woz was there. He came to me after the end of the share session in the sort of birds of a feather part of it, and said, I really want to get my computer into schools. Will you take one into schools? And I said, sure. He showed up at a Sonoma County Computer Club meeting, and he said, I have a gift for you. And he had a pizza box with the Apple I mother computer board in it. And I said, well, that's very nice. Thank you. I'm delighted. But what do I do with it? He said, well, you have to get somebody to build you a case and a power supply. So Glenn Worstel was one of my members. He was an engineer at HP. And he said, oh, I can do that. So I still have the original power supply and the case. Well, apparently Steve Jobs didn't want him to do it. And Woz insisted, and Jobs said, well, then you'll have to pay for it. So he did. I didn't find that out for several years. It took about 20 minutes to load the basic language from the audio tape if you had all of the pots adjusted correctly. So there was the tone, the volume, and the volume on the tape recorder that had to be correct. And then it had to stay powered up for long enough because there was no way to store the loaded program to let you type your basic program into the basic interpreter. So I didn't have my own classroom. I was a guest lecturer, guest teacher. And one of the math teachers at Windsor Junior High invited me to come and show the computer and teach basic to his class. So there was a class before his class, and I couldn't get into the room in time to load up the basic before our 45-minute class started. So that meant that I had 20 minutes to hope that basic loaded. And then we had 20 minutes to play with it, and that's 40 minutes. And then it took 5 minutes to wind down. So I think that we probably had 4 sessions, and on 2 of them I couldn't even load basic. Called Woz, and I said, I'm really appreciative that you gave us this computer, and it was given to Loop Center, which is a nonprofit corporation. It doesn't belong to me personally. I called him up and said, well, what would you like me to do? And he said, well, bring it down. So I brought it to him, and he took it. And every week or 2, I would call him up and say, well, do you have the machine ready for me? And he didn't. 6 to 8 months, he finally said, don't worry, I have something else for you. Gave Loop Center Apple II number 10 and said, just swap the boards. You can put this board in the same case with the same power supply and keyboard that you had for the Apple I. So I swapped out the boards, and I said, okay, do you want the old one back? He said, nah, keep it. That is true. And let me put out a call for help because it's one thing to do hobbyist and vintage computer festival enthusiasts and fans, to work with them. It's another thing to try and popularize what we can do with computing and education. And as far as I'm concerned, we have just scratched the surface of what could be done. She
really wished she could be here, but she couldn't. Now, if you're wondering why Liza was on one half of the screen because I was on the other half for my secret bat cave, and it just would have been distracting. So when we put it up on YouTube, we'll center it all up and get it going. So once again, I'm Corey Cohen. I'm an Apple I expert, if that's a title, I guess. It is now, right? You know, like Guy Kawasaki, I'm an evangelist. Yeah, that's a work title, right? Make it up. Eventually someone will believe it and start using it. So anyway, so I am kind of an Apple I expert. I gave a bit of my story on yesterday's owner's talk as to how I kind of got involved in all this. But I'm the guy who kind of goes to the auction houses, to owners, do repairs if they can't do it themselves. I do maintenance on them, I restore them, things like that. This is a real Apple I, and we do have the owner in the audience. This particular Apple I is an earlier Apple I. They came in 2 batches of boards. They were not sold in 2 batches. They were produced in 2 to 3 batches, I should say, but 2 distinct batch manufacturers. This is an earlier board. It was made, what we believe is the PCB fab that did all the Atari stuff. It was down the road from Atari. No one remembers the name. You'll basically notice there are a difference between this one and some of the others that we have here, which are from a fab company called NTI. They have a different look to them. There are mistakes on this board in the silk screen. There are no circuit mistakes, which was pretty rare back then. When you bought a computer, it was not unheard of if you bought it assembled, which was also rare, but if you bought it as a kit, you still had to take a razor blade and fix mistakes on the board. There were no mistakes on this board other than a silk screen where they printed something twice, which was corrected on the later boards in NTI. It was laid out by Howard Canton, who laid out most of Atari's boards at the time. Steve Jobs thought he could trade. Now, Steve Jobs said it was a VW bus. Howard sort of remembers a Volvo 1800 wagon. And Howard said, I don't do this for trade, I want money. So they sold their stuff. Woz famously sold his calculator. He worked in the calculator division and knew a new product was coming. He could use his employee discount and maximize how much money he'd get now by selling it early. Some people do that with their iPhones today. And Jobs sold his mode of transportation. We'll leave it at that. They paid Howard. Howard laid out the board using tape, which bent as you kind of stretched it. It gives the Apple I a very unique look. It's one of the reasons why people call it art, is because you can actually see some of the artistry in the bends. And it was really amazing thing. The Apple II was not laid out by hand in its final form. It was actually laid out by hand at first, and then Steve Jobs paid to have it digitally straightened. So anyway, so this particular Apple I, now we did not do I don't want to use the word smoke test, but we did not do a pre-test on this particular board. It hasn't been running about a year, so we might be troubleshooting live. This could be great. They are socketed, and this board came all the way over from Germany, so we'll see. We do have a replica cassette interface in here for 2 very good reasons. One is I didn't feel like unlocking another case because I forgot to take one, and the second reason is this one will actually be a bit more reliable because it has a reliability upgrade on it. So you heard Liza talk about 20 minutes to load BASIC. That was optimistic. So we're trying to get the best chance of getting something loaded. So we are not using a cassette player, we are using an iPad. Why? Because the tape can't stretch if it's digital. It's ironic on how much power is in this, but we're using it to load that. And obviously we made the cassette modification. We're also piping the video through a contraption of weirdly linked VGA module kind of adapters to try to get a clean signal. The Apple I and the Apple II is worse, are not really NTSC compliant. They're close enough for analog. Nothing is analog today. I can tell you I've even had differences in same monitor, same model, and gone to buy one in Best Buy in one store and in another store that should work, and they don't, off of Apple I signals. So this is a way to clean it up. And I think we're just going to jump into it. We're going to load up BASIC. It was not in ROM. So unless you were a hexadecimal 6502 opcode wizard, if you want to do anything productive, you probably were loading something like BASIC or an assembler off of cassette. So let me switch over the video here. So this might take me a moment. Okay, who has the fire extinguisher? I joke. When we turned these boards on for the first time, and we did one about the day before the show started, so 2 days ago, we turned one on the first time in 30 plus years, 35 years almost. There's a pretty large procedure to turning one of these things on. These blue capacitors do not smoke, they catch on fire. I should also mention, I guess we'll turn this into also a little Q&A about it. I get asked a lot, why are these so big, giant blue caps on here? If you owned a video game company and you made video game machines, like Atari, and you wanted your machines to run all day long in the pizza place or in the bar or whatever, or the arcade, you over-engineered your power supplies. And linear power supplies were popular. These are hi-fi, high-quality audio components, not radio level, not really computer, because there really wasn't something you could get unless you were building giant, mainframes. So these are very high-quality capacitors. And they just happen to be large because they're made for someone who's really into audio music and, with these giant tube amplifiers and things. So that's why, and that's what they knew. They worked at Atari. As a matter of fact, everyone talks about how Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak had to offer because of the parts closet issue at HP. HP, the first right of refusal. They also went to Atari and asked them if they wanted to buy the computer. And they said no as well. It would have fit in perfectly. It was literally designed very similar to their arcade machines. Howard laid it out. Its power supply using very similar components. But they said no. And we got the Atari 400, right? So anyway, one other thing I get asked a lot is why certain chips were used. Probably because they were free when he was designing it. The Apple I is a two-personality computer. It is essentially a terminal on one side, and it is a computer on the other. And they talk over one or two lines that are on the board. I could bring the terminal up all on its own without a CPU in the machine. Now, that means that when you see things on the screen print in a minute, it's going to print at 300 baud. So it's kind of also weird that, not too long after, we had the Apple II with crazy graphics, everything else, but the Apple I used dynamic memory, which was state-of-the-art for a personal computer or a kind of small computer. But then it used shift registers just like the TV typewriter that was a couple of years older. So it's a very weird design. And once again, I'm stalling a little because I'm really trying to remember, did I do everything before I turn it on? So we've got all of our cables in. They're checked. We have a fan, because this guy can hit 170, 180 degrees, no problem, and can start warping the board if it's not supported correctly. And it is short one support hole in the design. They should have added one. Howard messed up. That's about it. So, that being said, let's turn it on. And the video connector is not hooked up. So, now, the person who called it out, thank you. You knew I would have found it a second later, but here's our little contraption put together. So, okay. We'll try that again. So, it'll take it a second to stabilize. Sometimes we'll stabilize it this way. Now the Apple I will stabilize on an analog pretty easily, but on digital we get a little weirdness. So let me explain. So this is the processor reset. Usually if it wasn't trying to display this on a digital where it can't quite sync, it will basically just flash back and forth between 0, 0 and FF for each character, because the terminal section uses shift registers to store things, to store the screen. And it's just not initialized. And when I initialize it, notice it cleans up a little bit. It cleans up a little bit because the processor's running, everything else is going, and it kind of stabilizes. But some very interesting effects. I get asked from a lot of Mimeo, which are replica owners, why when I turn my computer on and off real quick do I get crazy characters in the beginning? It's because things were powering down in different states. I'm like, it's okay, it's fine. Wait 5 minutes, turn it on again. So this is all you got. We press reset to manually reset the processor. The early Apple IIs had the same thing, though they initialized memory a little differently, so it was a cleaner initialize. And we clear the screen. And if you're really good at it, you can clear the screen, press the button, because there's no other way to programmatically clear the screen. You can press the button and clear half the screen. You just have to be really fast, because it just cycles through. So we're going to load off the cassette a program. So C100R is where we are storing on the cassette adapter in 256 bytes the firmware for the Apple cassette interface, which is actually a digital interface. It approximates reading and writing well enough that it creates an audio signal and works at 1200 baud with 3 logic chips, an op amp, and 2 ROMs. 2 calculator ROMs. Ooh, we got a little funny here. There we go. What? There we go. Okay. I show you the board is actually working fine. This is the funniness of the digital. Something else, if you're an Apple II person, you'll notice I wrote C100. Come on, stay. You know what? I'm going to try something else here. I was actually going to try using this board. Has a particular modification done back in the day where it has its own video connector. They normally don't have this. And I'm just hoping it'll be a little cleaner. So let's try it that way. The good news is we've got like 13 other boards to try. Are we good? It's on computer? I got signal going, so you just tell me. So this particular board actually has a stock number on it, 0060. So the byte shop, so we might as well entertain, right, while we recycle the projector here. The byte shop went out and they put numbers on the back with a special type of security marker. And the number on the back was so that if you bought an Apple I and came to them for service, they knew it wasn't your friend's Apple I. So only boards that had been passed through their supply chain have numbers. You might have bought it somewhere else because they might have sold it to another store. Okay? So it's something kind of interesting. It helps us kind of figure out things, which batch it is. So in all likelihood, this one was from not the first 50, but the next 10 they sold out of the byte shop. So I'm going to put this down for a moment, plug it in. Once again, modern technology failed us. Now, So we've got our screen back. One of the tricks with the VGA adapter is if you're really careful, there's an actual signal adjust here. Adjust it. You can try and catch it just enough that the digital stuff works without spinning. We'll just keep our fingers crossed. If it spins, pretend you went out drinking last night. Or maybe you did. So in order to do the cassette, iPod, iPad, we plug into the adapter. Now, something should be mentioned that on a real cassette adapter, you can actually get, there's a little LED, and you're supposed to fiddle with these little pots on your cassette player so that you could use whatever you had at home. Apple didn't say, go buy our cassette player. There isn't enough volume out of a modern headphone jack to actually light up the LED. So it is just below where really it should be, but it works. It also should let you know that, yes, there's a reason why many of us lost our hearing from headphones back in the days. It's not so bad today. Did you want to type in the checkout program on this one? I don't expect you to remember it 40 years later, so let me get it in a book, and I'll read it to you. Oh, we lost our video.
Oh, here's all I did as I just typed.
So, back in, 1976, in the summer, this man would have been in the garage saying, I've got to go test a whole bunch of computers and ship them out. So he's going to type, and I'm going to kind of check you as you're going along here because it's going to be hard for you to see. Why don't we move he moves the keyboard. That's why he worked at Apple and I didn't.
Is there not a cordless mic?
I can give you my cordless mic. So, I'm going to get out of your way. Just throw that in your pocket.
Okay. So, back in the day of testing the Apple I, I actually used to type all the keys of the keyboard, which really didn't establish much. But really, you just hit the reset, you hit the clear screen. Where's the clear? Oh, gosh.
You haven't seen that in a while, right?
No, I haven't. I don't know that I ever saw that.
Really?
Really, the main thing you do to test one of these things, you type 0.f return and see if it lists memory. Oh my gosh, look at that. And then you would say 0 colon, 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that. And then 0 dot. It's hard to read this keyboard.
Sorry.
Oh my gosh, look, it saved memory. I stored a 1, 2. So that means the computer's working right there. That's all you need to do, really. The test routine that I used to do is, it's assembly language, of course. All right, here's the magic code 69.1. That means add 1 to the accumulator. 20. Okay. 20.
Unfortunately, we can't move the monitor because we have the live stream on it. We expected it to be on there. I was being told by you, I was, being very optimistic that would work, but it worked for a minute.
All right, so that little program I just typed in adds 1 to the accumulator and sends it to the character out routine and then jumps to 0. So what we're doing now is incrementing through the character generator. Not like the character generator normally would ever fail, but at least it's a program that's running. And I think you'd have to say, if that program runs, any program will run.
Maybe.
Maybe.
So okay, I'm going to tell a story. So that is sort of true, except there are some RAM bits that can be wrong or broken, and the program will still run. So it doesn't actually use every bit in all the bits.
Right, of course.
So the only way you actually know a machine works is because you can load BASIC.
Yes.
Because if you load BASIC, you're filling up one entire bank of RAM with a program, and it's coming off the cassette consistently, and then it actually has to use it. So if it runs it, then you can say, okay, it really works. Kind of like if you go on eBay and you look at like Altair, and they all say, it works, the lights blink. Doesn't mean it works. But, to be honest, back when the parts were new, that was probably very true. If you could get that far, it worked.
Yeah.
Now, after 35 years, most of my time troubleshooting after I kind of bring up a board is usually something to do with memory. Refresh is out of spec, RAM chips are dead, and that's always fun because that's one of the harder things to do. But I just wanted to mention it, but you're right. That ran back then in the garage, it worked. By the way, no one else tested computers that you could buy as a normal human being before they went out the door. So that actually was something Apple was first at. It seems crazy that you were really the first QA guy for a personal computer because no one else did it. If you bought an MSI or an Altair, in the beginning, they really didn't check them.
How many people do you think bought the fully assembled Altair? Most of them were kits.
They were just happy to get something, right? Because they took their money and didn't send it till later. At least Steve Jobs sort of shipped. So,
anyway, back on the subject.
That's why it was great, by the way, because you actually had a computer. You knew it worked when you got it home, and if you messed it up, it was your fault.
Yes. I don't remember that we ever even had a RAM test per se. No, we did RAM testing on the Apple II, for sure, but not on the Apple I.
Interesting. So the only warranty repair I know of in an Apple I is Dr. Wendell Sander, who eventually worked at Apple not too long after the Apple I came out, had a shift register changed, and he has like a receipt saying changed by S. Jobs.
That's funny.
So he's, I think, the only warranty repair. So we've got this running, which is really cool. This is also in the book, so you can look at that online if you even want to, in the Apple I Operator's Guide. We're going to load BASIC next and kind of say hello world. So I'm gonna do that because I can probably type that a little easier because it's my iPad. So so we're gonna. Oh, I actually did that. I did a half reset. So you can clear screen and reset, or you can do it in the middle. Get this set. I have to crank the volume up. Remember my comment? So that's usually when it fails on an iPad or an iPod. It's because I screwed up and hit the volume button. C100R gets us into the cassette. Make this a little brighter. Now, they also, one mistake in the Apple I ROM monitor is they use R for run and R for read. Gets a little confusing. So that was also fixed in the Apple II. It got a little less confusing. Because when I tell it I want to load memory at E000 through EFFF, R for read, W for write, the Apple I now knows where it should put the program in memory. But it's confusing because it's also R to run. So that was something I think that was probably fixed because someone got confused and said, sure, it's one character, no big deal. So now, Liza said it took her 20 minutes to get hers running with BASIC. I think we're right on schedule. So we're waiting for a slash to come out. It'll happen any moment now. Great. And then what we're going to do is we're going to cold enter BASIC. Cold entering BASIC means it will initialize everything. If we loaded another program off cassette, we will hot enter basic so we don't erase the program. And we've got a basic prompt. You can do something simple like, now, I want to be clear on this. Everyone spoke about yesterday how Woz was a perfect and fast typist. There is no backspace on the Apple I. If you mess up, you might have a chance of rubbing out the character like a terminal with an underscore. You might not. Now, most keyboards, including the ones sold by the Byte Shop, do not have an underscore character. It was not very common. So, just mentioning, you've got to be really good. And we've got a little program, Hello VCF. So it does work. If you can get that far, believe it or not, that adds hundreds of thousands of dollars to the value of an Apple I. That's pretty scary. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I want to load a quick little program. When I'm done loading that program, we're just going to run it for a minute. And while that's running, I want to let Daniel talk about something that he's working on right now. And he's going to be demonstrating over on the side by the Apple I exhibit. It's really, really cool because, as you saw, I was trying to merge modern technology, digital projector. It didn't quite work the way we wanted because it doesn't always work perfectly. He's consistently able to send email over Wi-Fi from an Apple I, in his case a replica, because you don't want to mess with the real one doing this kind of stuff, to the internet. So if you're nice to him, he will email you from an Apple I. And from the guy who actually was part of getting them out and really starting Apple. So, did I talk you up enough here?
Perhaps.
So we're going to reset. This keyboard's a little weird in that where the resets are and the clear screen. So most keyboards also did not have a clear screen. Some did. So that we've seen some very crazy things people do to wire up a clear screen. So I'm going to go out and I'm just going to quickly load up something we call Apple the 30th, which is not a basic program. Someone went in, took some very nice pictures, went into Photoshop, reduced their quality, turned them into ASCII art, and then had to write a program to compress them on the Apple I because there isn't enough memory in order to store all of these images. So they'll actually look pretty good from a distance. So it's actually maybe better we did it here, or so I've told myself. Well, I'm confident. I didn't even look till I typed it.
Who put together this program with the graphics?
I forget his name, his real name. He's actually one of the guys on Apple Fritter. And it's kind of become the quintessential demo to show an Apple I. Not that anyone actually ever did this, like back in the day, because most of the games, there were games. A lot of people bought them because they wanted to play games. But all the games were text-based. Hunt the Wampus, Lunar Lander Text, Blackjack, Football. There are a whole slew of games that Dr. Wendell Sander ported from 101 Basic Computer Games. So Star Trek is sort of graphics. It's got some ASCII graphics in it, but we got a little slash. Now, this program will actually run even if you can't load BASIC. So if you've got bad memory in one of the memory banks, as long as the other one's good, because there's two banks, you could actually run this. So we don't consider this a proof of life. So anyway, we'll let this go. And do you want to tell us everyone about this cool project? I was amazed,
yes.
By the way.
But before I get into that, I'll just mention since you brought up Wendell, I ran into Wendell here in the lobby yesterday, And he reminded me that what he did some time ago. So Wendell, you all know who Wendell is? He was the first serious. He was the first serious engineer.
Professional engineer.
Professional engineer. That's the word I was searching for. So Wendell designed pretty much all of the Apple II peripheral cards, of which there was 8, more or less. And he was the sole designer of the Apple III, and he was my mentor. I was just a technician, and Wendell taught me electronics.
Wendell also designed the headphone jack on the iPod, which sounds like, why do you need an engineer for that? Did you realize the iPhone, an iPod, headphone jack has to figure out if you have a microphone, if you're using headphones or an earpiece?
And the volume up and volume down is encoded ultrasonically in the audio channel. That was his job.
They brought him out of retirement for that, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So Wendell was here yesterday. He couldn't stay, but really kind of an inspiration to us. And he is one of the first Apple I owners for real, like bought it in the store, was showing off the cool things to Steve Jobs he was able to do, and Steve offered him a job. So pretty amazing.
Yeah, actually, on that subject, the reason Wendell was snapped up immediately is because he actually worked on the MOSTEC DRAMs, which the Apple used. So he was an expert.
Only the Apple used at that point, pretty much.
Yeah,
pretty much, yeah. In the small computers, in the small.
Anyway, so Wendell, in his retirement, he's a relentlessly creative guy. So he created an expansion bus for the Apple I. He created a serial card for the Apple I. He created a USB card. He created a ferromagnetic RAM card, non-volatile RAM card, essentially flash memory for the Apple I.
And a Bluetooth adapter. Because he doesn't have a cable to his Apple I. He just runs it off his iPhone, just sitting around. Because, you know, after he made the headphone jack, they got rid of it, so he needed to make a Bluetooth adapter.
But, so on the subject of video out, the Apple I is a purely character-based terminal as far as the video goes. It's just a character stream. So what he did is he has his USB card connected to a USB to Bluetooth, connected to his iPad, where the Apple I is essentially looking like a Bluetooth keyboard on the iPad. So he uses an iPad for the video display.
And keyboard, I think, at times, too. So he's relentlessly inventing great things. So we just can't talk enough about how great Wendell is. You know, and when I was getting into the Apple I's, you know, here's this guy, you know, I was an engineer at the time, but, you know, wasn't an Apple engineer. I worked in another company. And I just emailed him out of the blue asking Apple I questions, him and Woz, and both, to my surprise, just very happily started answering and sending me information. So they're both are great guys, and so we could probably go on about him for hours. So we'll not.
Okay.
But tell us about what you do.
Wait. One more comment about video. So I've brought up 6 Apple I's now, and as part of that Apple I replica project, I wanted to find a current commercially available LCD display that was not too expensive, that I could like make a full package for museums. And that just was a months-long, extremely frustrating project. I'd never found what I was looking for. I did find a Dell LCD, which would kind of work if you tweaked with it, but if you were scrolling, it would lose sync. And what I found out, so then I started reaching out to engineering friends. Well, it turns out that the sync video mix on the Apple I is not standard.
Yep.
So there's a resistor change that I made to make the levels right, but the sync is not right either. And it turns out that all the commercial LCD displays you buy now are basically engineered to work with a DVD player. Okay? And there's no cheap monitor that has composite input. And then, out of desperation, I set the Apple I aside and I started looking for a display that would work with the Apple II, thinking the Apple II...
Even worse.
Well, not worse, but the Apple II is not standard video either. And so I ended up with a whole bunch of different VGA adapters. I had HDMI adapters for the HDMI screens. The only good solution I found that was reliable was a $200 Samsung LCD TV that had a composite input, but it's like that. And that's what Wendell recommended. He was right.
I'm sure. So
anyway, all I'm saying is...
Well, actually, we should talk about your project, just real fast, before we get to the email. So I know you spoke a little bit about it yesterday. I just want to mention, so he's building, so if you really want to get, you don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy an Apple I, a real one, you can very soon purchase through Dan, where he built a bunch of replicas. So, and if museums are looking at them and other things, so you can say you've kind of got one built by the guy in the garage.
Yeah, well, that's true. And I resisted that idea for many, many years because it took way too much time.
Whoops, I am getting a little feedback. That would be me.
Anyway, sourcing all the parts was not the hard part. As I mentioned yesterday, the first 4 boards I built, none of them worked. That was a hurdle. I just bought 4 more sets of parts, and I basically have them all working now. The video was actually the hardest part. Finding a video solution, because I didn't want to ask museums to have to scrounge for antique parts. I wanted a current.
Right, and you also, it's not good if you're going to be running it all day long for, you know, a museum to have something like this, which actually has a lifespan to it, that's and not replaceable. So pretty cool though. And by the way, he just described my morning. So we compressed about 8 months of your life into 8 minutes or 10 minutes this morning, trying to sort out with the projector.
Right.
And we gave up. You didn't.
Anyway, so so the video project was last summer, or no, it was the summer before last. What I did last year, I'm using the CFFA compact flash adapter, so you boot from compact flash, because I didn't want to have to dedicate an iPad to load BASIC. And to be honest, I was completely exasperated by that cassette interface. Now, it probably works a lot better with an iPad or an iPod. The problem with cassette outputs is the volume would be changing, and you'd always have to tweak with it. It was very annoying. Anyway, it turns out that the guy who wrote the firmware for the compact flash card works at Apple, Dave Lyons. I tracked him down. I motivated him to modify it so it auto boots. So what my replicas do is you just type 9000R, it jumps to the card, loads BASIC, runs BASIC, loads the demo program and runs it, which is very satisfying.
Oh, I'm sure compared to what it was back in '76.
Yes, it's very satisfying. So I wrote to Woz to tell him that. I thought he would be very enthusiastic, and he goes, yeah, well, I really respect perseverance. Thank you very much. Anyway, so that brought us up to last fall, and I'm now finishing up the first batch of 8. Now the current hurdle is that the CFFA card is out of production, and Rich doesn't want to make any more of them. His wife says, no more taking over the kitchen table. And so I'm looking for another source for the CFFA card, but I think I have one. So then, now that brings us to this month. About a month ago, thinking about this VCF, once you had mentioned an Apple I event. Okay, so I'm in the smart home business. I have been stalling for a year looking for an Arduino wizard to help me with these 8266 Wi-Fi modules. How many people here know what the 8266 is? Okay, good number. The 8266 is really a revolution. It's as revolutionary as the Apple I in its own way, because you can buy the module for $2, and with the full breakout, it's $4 or $5. You can pay more at other places, but it's so ESP is the company, Espressif. They came out of nowhere. but it's a Wi-Fi module with the programmable ARM chip on a tiny board, and you program it through the Arduino IDE. So hugely popular in the maker community, and you know, not that many smart home products are based on it yet. And I'm not really sure why, because it's a 10-year-old part. But anyway, so my goal is to make cheap smart home accessories based on the 8266. And I didn't really want to get into learning another, you know, development regime. But I couldn't find anyone, and I just said, okay, I'm going to do it myself. It was I have to say, it was painful. I'm a long-time embedded engineer. I was astounded that neither the driver, nor the board support package, nor the libraries I needed were in the Arduino environment. And I had to go search around to find all of those, which a high school kid would not really be up for doing. I was just very surprised. Anyway, I got it to work. And the way it works is, I first built the interface card to the Apple I, which just traps a data byte on the data bus. So you write, I picked B1000 as an unused address space. So you just send either a FF or a 0 to B1000. It wakes up the module. The module wakes up and goes to the router, tries to log on. If it logs on to the router, it then goes to if this, then that in the cloud. How many people know about if this, then that? Okay, another good. So if this, then that, I don't know how they make money, but it's an awesome service. You can make telephony calls. You can do any kind of cloud. It works with Amazon, Alexa. You can do any kind of API-based operation from the API. So that's what I've got running. I have this ESP 8266 module. The other name is called Node MCU. So what the Node MCU is these two guys in Asia took the 8266 and wrote an HTTP interpreter on top of it, and then gave it away. So when you buy the node, it will talk HTTP, which is what we all want, of course. Anyway, so what my demo does is it wakes up the module goes onto the internet, logs on to if this, then that, invokes the app that I wrote, which then sends an email to my iPhone. Well, it could send an email anywhere you want.
So essentially, you've got an Apple I triggering emails out the internet, and you could, because of that chip, with that service, you could have it send emails, you could have it do a whole bunch of different tasks.
Yes.
So we'll say it, you found an actual use for an Apple I that's not playing games.
I know. So my personal goal at this point is to include the Apple I in the smart home ecology of the weather. Mitch Waite talked about his weather sensor yesterday.
Yep, Mitch did a weather sensor back in '76 with his Apple I.
Yes.
And so, yeah, once again, so that would be the third or fourth actual use for an Apple I that's real. 40 years plus later.
Yes. Question?
Perseverance, I think Woz needed to use another word for you. Crazy.
For $4, you can buy the chip, or I bought 3 of them for $12 on Amazon.
Right.
There's the project is called ESP Apple I.
Oh.
And a fellow in Columbia, Maryland, wrote the output chip displays on a television set, and then someone else wrote a 6502 emulator, and somebody else wrote an Apple I emulator on top of that.
That's very cool.
So you can run the entire Apple I on that $4 chip.
Wow.
And I have it running in the office.
That's wild.
Well, that's pretty crazy. So a $4 chip replaces a $400,000 board. Maybe $800,000 board. Okay, so we're rubbing this in because he's a brand new owner. So he actually bought one recently. So anyway, I was told we have like 5 minutes left, so I'm going to open it up really to 1 or 2 questions, either about the Apple One or about what what Daniel's done with sending to the internet, or about just don't ask me about how to hook up the video, because apparently that's a sore spot for me right now. Any questions? Oh, we have one over here. Do you want to hand him the mic? Okay, I'll repeat the question. What's the question? Well, he could send stuff back and forth between his computer. For this particular demo, he just triggered it, but he can email back and forth. So his was not the first Apple One on the internet. I actually, and I didn't do it with my real one, but with my replica with one of Wendell's cards. Someone wanted to try out some programs on an Apple One. He was writing an emulator. And I said, I'll just hook up an RS-232 to Ethernet box. I'll expose it on the internet on an IP. Don't tell anyone the address. And Wendell's card, and he was able to play around remotely on an Apple One replica I had set up. Wendell's cards actually require a slight change to the board, so you can't run it on a real one without a soldering iron, which obviously we don't want to do. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for your patience with the video, but as you can see, it really does work. Which board is this one? This is Dunstan? Which one was this, Dunstan? And if anyone's wondering, this board is the Dunstan board, and you can actually check out on the Apple One registry. You can check out pretty much all the known boards, and even ones that were known back in the day, like the one in the advertisement. That is the prettiest Apple One, and was probably stripped of its chips the moment the photograph was completed. And then cheap chips were put on it, was sold. By the way, Wendell found the original photograph in his files when he'd retired for the 2nd or 3rd time.
Wow.
So,
that's great.
thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Corey.